I always say, if you can't perform well in the bedroom, it will be very difficult for you to perform well in the boardroom.
Welcome to Take Your Lead podcast, where we empower you to take charge of your personal growth, development, as well as your emotional well-being. I am super excited on this beautiful episode to be joined by an incredible leader, an incredible author, an incredible husband, one of the greatest voices, I believe, in our generation, and someone who will definitely leave a lasting impact. Ladies and gentlemen, let me not leave you in suspense any further or any longer rather. I'm joined this beautiful morning, this beautiful day rather, by Exon King Mwami. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Can I also introduce you? I feel like I should also take a platform and just introduce. It's unfair for you to just bring up all that energy. Ladies and gentlemen, I am joined by a brother, a husband. He is a man of God, a passionate leader. And I think that's one thing you are going to love about him. Whether it's academics, this man has it all. He's a life coach, he's a mentor. Whether you're talking about in the corporate world or you're talking about in the academics, I am joined by none other than Mzwandi.
I guess we can't over-introduce each other simply because of the honor that we have for each other. I'm super honored and thank you so much for making time to be part of our podcast today. I'm super excited. I know that we're going to be learning so much from you. And I think one of the things I appreciate about you a lot is the fact that you add so much value to one's leadership potential and one's thinking. I think one of the important things within the space of personal leadership is the importance of your thoughts. And one of the things I'm also learning is how your thoughts begin to inform your feelings.
True.
And for the longest of time, I'm sure there's a beautiful book that you authored around this space. I think it was Success Addict, if I'm not mistaken. I'm a success addict, and we'll speak more about the books and the offerings that he has as we continue in our podcast. But one of the things within the space is maybe just to speak within how important your thoughts are as they relate to how you eventually feel externally.
My leader, look, we call them our thoughts, but really, these are serious voices within you.
Yeah.
This is conversations with yourself. And what happens with the generational thoughts is where you have been, what you have heard, the people around you, the things we do not even pay so much conscious attention to is what translates into thoughts.
Wow.
And how does that happen? The voices within us begin to communicate with our personal image, our self-identity, and we begin to hear these voices within us. And that's why, you said something powerful, that they influence how we feel. Yeah. Because you see, the moment you have I'm having a conversation with you right now, I'm transmuting energy, vibrations and frequencies. Now, this which is happening between us happens within one's own brain.
Sure.
That's why you find people who can't take it any longer just commit suicide. Why? Because it's like two individuals. Remember, as human beings, we are multi-personality. You don't have one personality. So now you find the motivated guy is having a conversation with a demotivated guy. The one who wins is what we call a dominant thought, which translates into an action. It is important to watch your thoughts.
Your thoughts, I love that. Just to pull something from what you just said now, especially in the space of how the dominant individual within the conversation is the one who wins the conversation.
Yes.
How do you now take control of the thoughts which will be positive and yield a more positive result rather than a negative result? Where you find yourself having conversations within your mind where, as you mentioned, you've got the motivated part and the demotivated part. How do you now intentionally put systems in place that will help you lean more towards the positive, best self, and move towards actualization of that individual?
Avoid giving attention to objects, places, people, spaces, environments that will generate negative thoughts. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
Because look, we cannot cure the plant.
Wow.
But we can refuse to plant the seed. You know, and so what we do is we have a lot of us who are living a life by default.
Wow.
We go to just any place.
Yeah.
And we go there, there is a saying, to pass time. What we don't understand is the images in that environment, the conversations in that environment, the vibration, the emotions that are coming out in that environment might not show you effects at that particular moment, but those are seeds.
Wow.
Those are seeds that you are planting unintended.
Wow.
When you go home 2 days, 5 hours, 2 months, 2 years later, the subconscious is such a powerful storage of such images.
Sure.
So stop going to places, stop associating with people, stop having conversations and listening to conversations that you know will influence you negatively. And then we come to positive thoughts.
Yeah.
Go to places that makes you happy.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that.
Yeah.
There are times when I'm feeling down, I take up my car, I drive to the suburbs to just look at a house that I deserve to live in.
Wow.
I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
But I just to look at that, the emotions that house brings to me makes me go, and I don't even realize that 7 days later I get so motivated to work. My work ethics is on steroid. Why?
Yeah.
Now, because of a certain plant of imagery or a certain plant of conversations, people like yourself, when we have conversations today, it might not make sense because maybe I'm demotivated.
Yeah.
It might not make sense because maybe I am depressed.
Yeah.
But 2-3 days later, when I've gathered my physical energy and I've made it to be in congruency with what my soul desires, I mean, that's a bomb.
Wow. Maybe speak more towards the space of not living by default, but being very intentional about your surrounding and your space and who speaks to you, and especially if you from a space where you are needy, you seek relationship, even when relationship is working against you, where you just want that human interaction, and you're so needy to the space where you just want to be around people. You mentioned passing time,
Yes.
and you pass time, but there is no positive deposit that's being made in you, and the importance of surrounding yourself with people who will give you that positive, and positive, not just positive in terms of positive energy, but positive as a seed that will help you become a better person, think better thoughts, and do better.
Thank you for that, my leader. Look, let me start here. We are a generation that is scared to be on our own.
Yeah.
We are so scared to face ourselves.
Yeah.
So what we do is, because we can't face ourselves, we'd rather face other people.
Yeah.
Because we can't introspect ourselves, we'd rather watch other people's lives.
Yeah.
Because we cannot have conversations with ourselves, we'd rather have a useless gossip with other people. It needs to start there.
Yeah.
When you buy a cell phone and put a SIM card and somebody calls you, the cell phone is gonna ring.
Yeah.
Is that the ringtone you want? Whether it's the ringtone you want or not, the phone will ring. It is up to you now to go to settings, go to ringtones, choose the ringtone that you want to. And this is, now that's what it means to live a life by design. There are people who have chosen to live life by default. They buy a phone and they are okay with that ringtone that is put on default. Most of these things, every electronic you go to, it has got what is called factory settings.
Yes.
What is factory settings? Factory settings is, do you want the settings to be as it was when it was created by the manufacturer? And most of us, that's why we find we are not grown.
Can I just maybe interject?
Please come in.
I love what you say. Let's talk now about the tension of moving from default factory settings to customizing the settings. Because I'm sure there's tension there, where you move from the norm, where you move, take an iPhone for example, your lovely phone that you have, which is the common ringtone that when it rings, it's identified with an iPhone. But now you want to personalize and customize it. And there's that tension even in terms of how we live life, when we've been accustomed and acclimatized to expecting certain things. and having to now begin to shift your thinking as to, okay, I want to begin to customize my life, but everyone is doing it a certain way. And because they do it a certain way, I feel I need to follow suit in order for me to fit in.
When you're running a marathon, everyone is running. Unfortunately, not everyone has the same energy. And that's what the life we live in. The moment you fall into the crowds and you fall into what society wants and everything, you are going to live, but not your life.
Wow.
And that's why we say you are going to not just live, but you reduce yourself to simply existing.
Sure.
Because you need to realize that you are not better than anyone else, and no one else is better than you, but you're different from everyone else, and everyone is different from you.
Yeah.
It is that difference that we look for when we begin to be intentional about our design, more than just being on default. The tension will be there. Why? Because remember, since you were born, we are used to everybody feeling sorry for us. We used to cry and they used to bring food for us. We used to cry and they used to bath us. We would cry and they buy us clothes. We would cry and they buy us toys. But as we grow, time itself gradually dictates that we begin to live from a style of default to design. Because now we realize that the most important things don't come by crying. They come by going for it. Doing something to deserve it. We need to be able to understand that there is always a sacrifice for change. And for us to be able to see the best that you can ever be, we have that tension is amazing.
That's I think for our podcast family, I think they would really appreciate it. Maybe just tear off a bit and look into that sacrifice of change. What are some of the sacrifices that you had to make for change, which have given you a high return on your investment, especially in the space of your personal leadership and personal growth?
Letting go of the comfort zone of relationships. There are people that are amazing to be around with. Your childhood friends who are really amazing. You've known them ever since you were born, and sometimes you just have to let go because where they are suffering from. My wife is very good with English, so she's got this word she uses, nostalgic, something like that, where you are too stuck in your past. Every time you meet, it's beautiful. And that's the thing with beautiful past memories. You're gonna have to sacrifice. Another sacrifice is you're gonna learn to embrace being alone. That's another sacrifice. We go to clubs, we go to church, we go to visit toxic family members because we are scared of being alone. And it is painful. It is painful to sit in a room looking at walls and feeling like the same walls that are protecting you are coming towards you to crush you off. It is hard, it is a sacrifice to sit in a mirror, look at your 20, 30-year-old self with nothing that you have achieved on your own. It is a sacrifice. That's why we find people running to drugs, running to everything else, because they want to introduce a certain element into their mind that will make them avoid that. Well, you have to sacrifice money. Sometimes the very same money that you need to buy bread, just buy a book. There is so much of those. I always say, my leader, the sacrifice of success where you are is cheaper than it will be in the next 5 years. Because what can cost you a friend today might cost you your health in 5 years from now. What could cost you? What could cost you maybe money, 1,000 rand today, might cost you family in 10 years. What could cost you, just time, an hour of time today will cost you 20 years in the future. So depending on the success that you are pursuing, what is the price tag? Why haven't you done what you know you need to do today that you are postponing? Because if you don't do it today, by the time you do it, there will be tax and interest added on that sacrifice.
So maybe as we bring the plane in for landing, especially within this point of sacrifice and the price tag within leadership and growth and development, and how you mentioned the fact that it increases, and the only guarantee that tomorrow is going to be better is if you're growing today. And if you're not taking intentional steps today, which will bring you closer to the life you want to live tomorrow, you can forget about it.
True.
And I think one of the things we do, which you mentioned as well, is we keep putting it off. I'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'll do it next year. I'll do it in 5 years.
Yeah.
And we underestimate the compounded interest or the accumulative growth. I think that's one of the important things that we need to learn, and it's part of what I'm learning as well, as to how growth accumulates by reading a book, by listening to something, by attending a seminar, a webinar, something that adds value to you. You might not see the return currently or in the immediate, but long term it begins to compound. And I'm bringing this in maybe to ask you within your space as to what's the greatest leadership lesson that you've learned, and how has it compounded to the person that you are given what you do?
That it is painful to be different, but it's okay.
Wow.
Because the moment you go towards the root of your difference, you will be criticized. And if you can't be a leader without criticism, the spotlight of leadership is called criticism.
Wow.
Without it, you are not a leader.
Wow.
If what you are doing what you identify as your leadership route, you have too many people applauding for you and clapping for you, then criticizing you, there could be that you have fallen into everyone else's norm.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to leadership, the outstanding part of leadership is coming with critical information, being able to lead and knowing that there are people who are going to criticize you. It is painful to be criticized. I have learned that when you lead, and that's where leadership skill comes in. Because there are people who just are not going to follow the first time. They are not going to follow the second time. They are not even going to follow the third time. It will take at least a fourth attempt for you to stamp your mark and say, indeed, this will be able to work.
Can I just maybe check, you mentioned something so profound as to how the spotlight of leadership is criticism. What would you say to a leader who's struggling to receive criticism, and criticism breaks or stops the morale of that individual? Because truth be told, it's not nice when you are criticized, especially when you're giving and doing your best. How would you say one can change either their view or have a certain approach as to how they receive or view criticism?
3 things, my leader. 3 things for that. Number 1, I'm always about personal leadership.
Yes, sir.
If there is anything that is troubling you in the public domain, run back in your private space and work on it.
Wow.
If you are having problems receiving criticism in public, that is one thing you need to go back. Criticism will never end. It will always be there. So you need to teach yourself, your emotions, your mind, how to manage it in your private domain. The second thing is, it helps to have associations of people who will be able to tell you the truth in private before you go in public.
Wow.
The other thing that I don't want to run away from is, you need to deal with your pride.
Wow.
Sometimes it could be that the reason you are struggling receiving criticism is because of your ego and pride. Especially with us males, because we don't take criticism as a ladder of improvement. We take it as an attack.
Can I just maybe jump in there, which I think is something so profound and very important for us in terms of how we approach criticism. Can we use feedback as a criticism loop? So instead of viewing it as criticism, constructive, destructive, however, but use it as feedback. So when someone says something which you might view as criticism, rather term it and receive it as feedback. It can either be feedback that's negative or positive, but it's feedback based on what you are doing. And if you're smart, I think as a leader, you can use that feedback to improve, because most of the time, at a certain extent, depending who's giving you that feedback, it has the potential of opening an awareness to a blind spot that you might not potentially be seen as a leader.
Now, that is very true, my leader. And I love the way you are putting it. And it comes with attitude. It comes with what you have done with your inside work.
Yeah.
For you to be able to turn everything that... You see, there are people who will criticize you because they are not an audience for your leadership.
Wow.
Not because you are doing something wrong. There are people with great ideas, but you are selling the great ideas to wrong people. The people are great, but just wrong for your idea. So you need to be able to change your attitude and see those people not as enemies, but maybe just maybe as people who are, in my speaking, when I started speaking, things that I learned. Number one, I learned that if you speak long, you speak wrong.
Yeah.
So no matter how powerful my message is, if it becomes too long, the feedback or the criticism I'm going to get is not based on the content.
Yeah.
It's based on the time I use to express my message. The second thing I learned also is if you can't teach a baby something that you call yourself a master in, you have not mastered it yet.
Wow.
Until you simplify your idea, your content, your leadership style in a way that a baby can be able to conceive it, to receive it, and be able to understand it, then you haven't mastered it yet.
Wow.
And so these are all just a few things that help us change that attitude of saying, there are people who will criticize you, not even because you are wrong, they will criticize you because for them, they do not know how to correct something.
Wow.
It is not your fault, it's not their fault.
Wow.
But as a leader, you need to take that up to yourself because leadership is about two things, responsibility and accountability.
Sure. Well, lest we talk too long and we end up being wrong. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast, and you've added so much value to me, as you always do, and to our podcast family. Maybe your parting thoughts and your parting shots as we bring this plane in for landing.
Let me end by saying, every time we have an interview like this, and it sounds like wisdom is one-sided.
Yeah.
But I always try and remind people that are listening to say, great contents are provoked by great questions. Wow. So thank you for asking great questions. People would be hearing, and because I'm talking too much, and this is really just because I'm responding to amazing questions. So thank you so much for being able to construct questions that would provoke these kind of thoughts that will be able to help other people. And that is really what's important, surrounding ourselves with people who can be able to ask amazing, great questions, because that is quite a challenge, to bring out the best. And just, to close it up, look, before you lead other people, before you lead in your organization, before you lead at your school, before you lead at church, try and be a master and a leader of your own mind, your own emotions, your own spirit, your own environment. It is very, very important. Because we have a lot of people today who call themselves leaders, but all they are is bosses.
Wow. That's a whole story for another day, which is so powerful, because I'd really like for you to clearly define for us what it means to be a manager, to be a boss, and what it means for you to be a leader.
Well, I think to simplify it is to say a boss is that one person who's not satisfied with who they are, and they want to impose their weaknesses on those who report to them. So they come out trying to be strong, trying to be egoistic. Yeah. Bosses are always doing everything they can to show they have power. Yeah. Well, with managers, these are people who are not entitled to have a solution. When there's a crisis in an organization, the manager's duty is to manage, not to take it away. And so that's why they are always in the forefront. They are always in the forefront. These are people who go for PR to preserve reputation instead of going in the background and build the character of an organization. And that's where a leader comes in. A leader is a person who knows that in that environment you are, there must not just only be good management, there must be a solution. Wow. And sometimes it takes you going in the back seat identifying other strengths of the people around you, sending them to be in the forefront. A leader is not scared to not be recognized for the work well done. But I mean, that's just a summary that we can always go in some other time.
Thank you so much. Where can people get to connect with you to glean more from this deep well of wisdom that you are, and some of the products that you offer, as I mentioned, that would speak about them towards the end of our podcast?
Well, this is a world of social media, and I think one of the greatest secret of being into leadership is to learn to adopt as quick as we can. So you can catch us up on Instagram, Accent King Mwami, and the Kingdom Couple, on Facebook, Accent King Mwami, and of course you can just on YouTube, Accent King Mwami, you can just search on the Kingdom Couple right there. We have a few books. I'm a Success Addict, one of the greatest books that was written in a time where I started realizing that for me to be different, I don't need to just discover my difference. I need to develop it and deploy it. Very powerful book. The second book, I interviewed God. The 21 questions I've been meaning to ask God. Questions like, what was the greatest investment God made for himself? Beautiful 21 questions. The other question is the question, apology accepted. You know, a lot of us today are not as efficient and effective in our leadership spaces because of our emotional scars. We need to be able to learn to accept an apology that will never and was never given to us in order for us to access our own healing and our own happiness. And of course, the Kingdom Couple book that talks about relationship. If you check and do your research very well, consistent, effective leaders in the world today are those with very stable marital relationships. You need to be able to build a good environment at home for you to be able. I always say, if you can't perform well in the bedroom, it will be very difficult for you to perform well in the boardroom. And that is really what I believe in as a leader. Everything you are going through at home affects. So you need to create that environment. So those are few books that we have definitely just taken out for people to always build on this personal relationship.
Thank you so much. Till we meet again, let's continue to change the world one
individual
at a time.
At a time.